Let me welcome everyone. Let me welcome you to the Future Trends Forum. I'm very glad to see you all here. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm the forum's creator, host, cat herder, and MC for this hour. And we're going to be exploring a particular facet of the future of education. But before we do that, we have to introduce the forum, what it does, where it came from, who supports it, and how it works. And then we'll dive into our discussion with our wonderful two guests. So to begin with, you should know that the forum is a spin-off of a project that I've been running for more than half a decade now, called the Future Trends in Technology and Education Report, or FTTE. That's a monthly trends analysis that takes a look at current trends in technology and education and mapping them onto real-world developments so that we can explore forward how they could influence where education and technology go. If you haven't been there, just go to ftt.us and you can find out more. And also on Twitter, we use the hashtag FTTE. Tara, if you just advance the next slide, please. Yeah, the next one past this. Now, the forum here and the FTTE report are part of a larger project I've been running called the Future of Education Observatory. This is a multimedia, interactive, very, very socially engaged attempt to try to grapple with the future of education and technology. So this forum is part of that, as the FTTE report, as well as a blog, as well as more pieces of writing, as well as a bookstore, and including as well a regular book club. So if you haven't seen all of this, the Future Education Observatory is a big tent with a lot of activity in it. Just go to futureofeducation.us to find out more. Now, next slide, please. When I say social, it's a key part of this is that we're not only talking about one region or one nation, but we're looking at the future of education technology worldwide. It's really important to do this because that way you can thinking globally and internationally lets you avoid some of the parochial limitations and keeps you open to the wide range of possibility. You can see here that we've had conversation from literally around the world, from multiple continents. This is unusual, and it may in fact be unique, and I'm very glad to see the international participation. Now, over to the next slide, please. Now, before we go further, I have to explain not just what the forum is, but also who makes it possible. I want to thank several of our sponsors. To begin with, I'd like to thank NYSERNet from New York State. It's a nonprofit that helps get that state's colleges, universities, museums, and libraries onto the broadband network. We're very grateful to them for their support. We're also grateful to Shindig, because as you can tell, Shindig makes available this technology. So let me just quickly take you through the technology if you're new to it or if you need a refresher. There are a few parts of the screen. Where I am right now and where this slide is just for another minute is called the stage. Everyone in this video conference can see and hear everything on the stage. And below us is what I think of as a participant swarm. This is where you can look around and you can see Paul Henley, and you can see Brenda. You can see a silhouette for Ryan, a silhouette for Tracy, and you can see these people moving back and forth like a kind of Brownian motion. And that lets you see everybody else or get a glimpse of everybody who's involved. Now, if you'd like to talk to one of those people privately, simply double-click on their icon. If they're up for talking with you, your two icons will click together. You'll have your own private audio-visual bubble so you can have a conversation. Think of it as your own DIY code of silence. Now, here's the stage, there's a participant swarm, and there are a bunch of tools for interacting, which is what this forum is all about. So let me take you through those. The bottom of the screen has a white strip running across it with a whole bunch of tools. You pick out three of them. If you look at the left edge, you'll see right now there are three buttons. One of them looks like a bunch of people on top of a dialog box. That's the chat box and participant guide. So if you click on that, you'll see two panes open up. On the left is a big pane with a kind of film strip of all the people who are here so far. And you can just look at them and you can mouse over them. So if I mouse over Sean Fraser, I can see he's an editor. If I mouse over, let's see, Skallerup, Bessette, she's an editor. If I mouse over Tara Petz-Spritzer, I have no idea, but I think there's this gentleman looming behind her in the shadows. You can look and see who's there and get a sense of the whole audience, which is neat. On the right pane, you'll see a chat box where everybody can have a chat conversation. So if you're just joining us now, you can see we've been introducing ourselves, comparing stories of weather-based atrocity, and that's a chat box where anything can happen. Please feel free to ask questions, make comments, share URLs, or take notes. Now, that's all from the chat box and participant pane. Also on that white strip are two other buttons. One looks like a question mark with a circle. If you click that, up will pop a box that will let you type in a question or a comment that you'd like to raise. And when the time is right, we'll flash the results on the screen, and I'll read it out loud so everyone can hear. And that's, you'll see in the course of the hour, that's a pretty popular tool. Next to that on the white strip is a raised hand. This is probably the best tool. That tells us that you'd like to join us on stage. It's easy to do. As long as your microphone is working, you've got a camera that works, and you're in a place where you can talk without being overrun by hordes of people, just click that, and we'll bring you up on stage, and you can ask a question. It's actually quicker and easier to do than it was for me to describe. So that's what this forum is about, hence the name. This is about discussion, not presentation. So keep in mind those tools. And please thank Shindig for making these all possible. We have one other source of support that I'd like to thank, which is our friends on Patreon. Tara, would you advance the slide there so you can show that? Patreon is a crowdfunding site where people can contribute to keep a creative project or person going. In this case, the creative project is my work in the future of education. So if you see here on the slide, we've got a whole bunch of people who contributed. Chris Lott, Michael Haggins, Ginny Kim Hung, Paul McConaughey, Kyle Johnson, Bob Johnson, lots of folks, dozens of them. So if you contribute as little as $1 a month, that helps us keep the lights on, the website's humming, and these conversations popping. Let's go to patreon.com/Brian Alexander. All right, now that's who supports this. That's how the technology works. That's our purpose. That's where it came from. Now let's cut to the chase. Let's cut to our guest for this week. I'm very, very grateful and excited to be able to have two extraordinary people here. We have Lee Skallerup Bessette, who is currently an instructional technology specialist at the University of Mary Washington, which is a great school. Lee does all kinds of great work based, among other things, in teaching writing. And you'll see what an extraordinary thinker she is. We also have Joe, and Joe, if I mangle your last name, please correct, which is Joe Fruscione, who used to be an adjunct professor and created one of the leading adjunct faculty organizations, Skallerup. He's a really, really neat guy. He's also here on sufferance of his very, very small child, who at any minute could decide to wake up and haul his poor beleaguered father off of the Shindig stage. So if that happens, just beware that can happen. If you're a parent, you know how this goes. Our subject today is one of the most enormous challenges and one of the largest developments in higher education in the United States, which is the conversion of the professoriate from being a majority tenure track and tenured to being a majority adjunct, part-time faculty who can be hired and fired at will. It's extraordinary development that has implications for every aspect of education. That's what we'll be talking about today. Let me welcome both Joe and Lee. I'm glad you're both here.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Oh, our pleasure, our pleasure. And Joe, I admire you as one father to another. Good luck. And bring the lad on screen at some point if you can.
May the odds ever be in my favor.
I know that phrase. And you'll hear that phrase a lot. So just to begin, let me ask each of you what you're working on this year in 2018. Let's start with Lee. What are you working on? What's taking up most of your time and brain power?
Well, at the University of Mary Washington, our project is the Domain of One's Own project, where all faculty,
yes.
student, and staff get their own domain. And one of the pressing issues, or one of the issues that came up as part of our new strategic plan and has become more pressing, is that we're starting to explore integrating digital fluency into the curriculum here. So that's my big thing right now that I'm focusing a lot of my time and energy on, is really thinking through the issue of digital fluency. What is it? How do we learn it? How do we teach it? How do we assess it? How do we integrate it? So we're getting started with that in earnest. And so that's one of the big things that I'm focusing on right now in my day-to-day job.
That's huge. Can I ask the quick, obvious question that you probably are bored to death of hearing, which is, what's the difference for you between digital literacy and digital fluency?
Digital fluency, we have the digital literacy, we see it as a facet of digital fluency. It is about making and producing and taking it to that next step. It's not just recognizing it, it's what do you do with it? And what are you doing with it? And there's the digital part as well, where digital literacy is, you think of it as, again, the difference between being literate in a language, and that's also my background is English, and I'm bilingual, I've taught ESL, those kinds of things. And so it's a question of, like, do I recognize, can I read it? do I see as like, okay, that's English, that's French, that's whatever language, identify it, kind of understand it versus actually being fluent in something, which is to be able to use it, to express yourself, to use it in creative ways, in critical ways, in ways that make sense. So I think of it around the language divide, but that's just because it's my background. But it's really the difference between critically consuming and critically making. Now, the consumption is an important part of it, but then what do we do with it?
That's great. That's great. I agree. That's fantastic. And that ties together with a couple of themes we've been exploring in the forum. We've had folks talking about the domain of one's own, like Audrey Waters, and we've had Jim Grimm as guests. And of course, digital literacy we discussed in different ways. I'm very glad to hear about that work.
Yeah.
Maybe, Rob, we can follow up maybe in a few months to see how that goes.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'd love to.
And Joe, besides being doing the toddler wrangling, what else are you allowed to work on this year?
Primarily my freelance editing business.
Oh, great. What kind of stuff do you edit?
Lately, it's been a bit of everything. I'm currently juggling two very different projects, which is kind of good to keep things fresh. One is a social sciences dissertation about platonic love in the workplace. And then the other is a program book and some website content for a local poetry festival. Nice. So there's a lot of code switching and gear shifting when I kind of move from one to the other. So that's professionally, that's my primary task. And my work with Precaricore, helping adjunct faculty, has sort of been a steady stream of work and activism since we founded it a little over 3 years ago. But my day-to-day primary stuff is freelance editing, and I'm also co-editing. Some of you know Kelly Baker, who's a freelance writer and an editor of Women in Higher Ed. She and I are co-editing a book called Succeeding Beyond Academia that's going to be due out from the University of Kansas Press in the fall. Lee has a great piece in there. We have 14 essays from people who have left academic careers for different either freelance or full-time jobs. And they tell us a bit about not only their journey, but some sort of basic steps of how they got there. And that's going to be due out. That's due out in September from Kansas.
Can you,
stay tuned.
Well, when it hits the stands, when it goes live, can you let me know so I can throw it around social media, and maybe we can bring some of you here to have a forum session about
I would love that. We put together the book that we all would have wanted when we started our PhD programs, because most people in the collection are roughly the same age, so we would have started either late 90s or mid 90s. And we were sort of, started academia with one kind of job market and set of expectations. And then when we left, it was all over the place. So we kind of wrote the book that we would have wanted 20 odd years ago.
Oh, hang on a second. Are all three of us Generation X? Is that possible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's remarkable.
I'm the late tail of it. I just got under there, but yeah, I'm Gen X too. Yeah.
Well, welcome. No one ever talks about us, but I'm glad you're here.
I'm in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump onto the adjunct rule. Then we'll use your work with Precaricore as a bridge. And friends, if you're new to the forum, I have always dozens and dozens of questions to ask, and you'll see that as our guests respond and think out loud and comment, more questions that come up. But the purpose here is for you to ask your questions. So as we go, please be ready to fling out comments, thoughts, questions. Examples of what people are talking about, requests. I'll be monitoring the chat box, but I'd really love to hear from you. So tell us to begin with about Precaricore. What is it doing? What does it do? Where's it going?
In the simplest terms, we give money to adjunct faculty in need. We founded it a little over 3 years ago. It's two other former adjuncts and I. It was and some of this was based on discussions in different activist groups. A lot of it really was just sort of talking out or thinking out loud of what we need is a big pool of money for adjuncts who have things like car insurance or medical bills or daycare, etc., and either waiting for payday or there just simply isn't enough. And then So we run strictly by donations, and just by kind of happy coincidence, within the last week and a half, we've made 3 awards to people for a few $100s each. And a lot of that is based on donations. And we also had in the fall, Facebook had a sort of donation matching drive in conjunction with Giving Tuesday, and we raised some money from that. And that, I mean, in the simplest terms, that's what we do. We also try to do some outreach. That's if the about numbers of adjunct faculty, and we help to get their stories out. I run the Twitter handle. It's just @PrecariCorps on Twitter. So we know it's an uphill battle, and in a little over 3 years, we have funded, I think, 25 adjuncts, roughly, probably on average $400 each. So in the grand scheme of things, that's really not much, but we gave those people help that they otherwise wouldn't have gotten, based on their salaries and based on them working over the summer, having no job contract, no security, and no income.
Right. That's fantastic.
And it reminds me a lot. It reminds me a lot now of what Sarah Goldrick-Rab is doing with her FAST Fund, directly funding students, because the research has shown, at least on the student side, that a couple $100s makes a difference. Right? These students are dropping out not because of huge $1,000, tens of $1,000 gaps, but because of a couple $100s. And we know, as our experience as adjuncts, about that exact same thing, how much difference just a couple $100s can make to get your car fixed so you can get to your job, to keep the lights on. And it's been, it's heartbreaking when you're in the adjunct community and in contact with a lot of adjuncts, which is what social media has been absolutely amazing for. It's really just, it can be extraordinarily isolating to be an adjunct. Even within your own institution, when you know that there's another army, there are other adjuncts there, but there's never any time, there's never any space. There's also fear about connecting. And so, social media, and I know Facebook is not the greatest place right now, but certainly Facebook and Twitter have been so instrumental in helping the adjunct movement, even just so that we can connect and not feel so alone, and have our voices be heard. Even if it's just for each other, and to know that, we're all in this together, as crappy as it might be. Am I allowed to swear on this?
Well, yes, you are. Yes, you are.
It's shitty. It's shitty. Being an adjunct is shitty.
It is horrible. It's not a career path. It's a career cul-de-sac or a dead end. It's just the same
pit.
Every semester. Every semester, it's the same thing.
Well, let me walk this back a little bit. And again, friends, I'm sure you'll start having questions. And by the way, if anybody here has stories they want to share, please feel free. This is a great place for that. Mentioning Sarah Goldrick-Rab, she was a guest on the forum and author of a book that we read in our book club. He was a fantastic person. It's a great inspiration. I have to say, as someone who did a little labor history, it sounds like the PrecariCorps is fulfilling the role of some unions, especially a century ago, where you raise a little bit of funds, not to make anyone rich, but to make the difference between being evicted or not.
Right, and some of it was that. I mean, one was car insurance. So someone, like as Leah said, someone was literally able to get to work. Some was childcare or medical bills. We do offer, if people need it, it's more time sensitive, but if they have to go to a conference, and because many departments don't give adjuncts any funding for travel. Some might do it on a case-by-case basis. I was fortunate when I taught at Georgetown in the English department, an emeritus professor had donated or sort of created a yearly fund exclusively for adjuncts to travel to conferences.
Wow.
And that was, it was unfortunately, it was generosity, not university-wide policy.
Right.
And so I hear of things here and there of this, this chair is particularly generous or understanding, but what I know a lot of adjuncts would like is at some level policy. Less than what full-timers get, but something, so they can, otherwise they just get stuck in the trap of, if they can't network and share their research, how are they going to get ahead ever?
Well, that's that's interesting. Taylor Kendall in the chat box just mentioned perhaps. I'm not sure I've got your acronym right. He has DOOO legislation can flow from the mental OER funds that come to the state level. That's interesting. Let's make sure that we're on the same page. What's the status of adjuncts in American faculty right now? I'm saying American because this is a especially American phenomenon. How many are there, and what's happening?
I don't think we can limit it now to the United States. I know that Canada is also in the same situation. Their pay is a little bit better because all universities in Canada are unionized. It's a really interesting situation. So the pay is better, but not that much better. It's also just as precarious in terms of year-to-year contracts or semester-to-semester contracts. Cost of living is still cost of living. Yeah, sessionals, exactly. They're called sessionals, or in Quebec, it's chargé de cours. And right now, in England, right now in the UK, not even England, all of the UK, their lecturers are on strike. For the same because of, and it's huge. It's huge right there, and it's getting almost no coverage here in the United States in terms of higher education news. Because there's a reason why the organization is called the New Faculty Majority. Because it is the new faculty majority. 75% of courses are not taught by tenure or tenure track faculty members. Now, that also includes graduate students at R1 institutions, but it is over 75% of post-secondary, and the community colleges are included in that. 75% of post-secondary institution, or 75% of credits, I don't even know if it's 75% of courses, but 75% of credits taught in post-secondary institutions are taught by non-tenured or tenure-track faculty members. And it's 75%. That's massive. It's huge. It is the new faculty majority. Most students in their academic careers will primarily be in contact with either graduate students or adjunct faculty. And most aren't unionized. The majority aren't unionized. There are some places where it's a situation where the adjuncts are in the same union as the tenured and tenure track faculty members, and the types of contracts that are negotiated are not beneficial to the adjuncts. In fact, they will negotiate stuff away from the adjuncts in order to get it for the tenure and tenure track faculty members. We're often met. I've written publicly about adjunct issues. I know Joe has too. And I was just reading about gaslighting, because that's what I do. And a lot of the times it becomes a situation of being gaslit about our own situations as adjuncts. Oh, it's really not that bad. Or if it was so bad, nobody would do it. Why do you even do it? You're living the life of the mind. Yeah, no one's forcing you to do this. It's you're complaining about, and when we talk about like job insecurity and we talk about low pay and we talk about these kinds of things, we're told, well, that's the case for the majority of American workers. And I said, yeah, but there is a class of people doing the exact same work that we are, who are making 5, 6, 7, 8 times more than we are, teaching less. It's not to say that, and I mean, I'm a big fan of solidarity across the different levels and the different types of employment, particularly in post-secondary institutions. Staff are also, in a lot of cases, underpaid and exploited within their roles and disrespected in their roles. The wage employees on university campuses are exploited and disrespected within their roles. And so, I don't think we're special in any way, shape, or form, but I think it's about time that the institution acknowledges that they are in violation of some of their core principles and ethos in their treatment of the majority, not just of their faculty, but the majority of their employees, right? Like, it's just the hypocrisy. Yeah,
There's
sorry.
a lot of, of course.
How much does that affect the student?
Yeah.
Good question.
Right. I mean, in the years I taught, I've adjuncted for 15 years. That kind of went through some of my PhD study, and then after, for 7 of those years, I taught at 2 schools, which meant, you know, in any given semester, I would have had between 70 and 90 students. It's a lot of shuttling around, and all of that commuting time and all of that hustling. If I was lucky, I made $40,000 a year. And that's in the DC area, which is very high cost of living, and it would just go. Rent, everything else, it would just go. I would literally not be able to count how much time I lost commuting, which is time I didn't spend meeting with students, spending a little bit more time with their writing or other assignments, working on lecture notes and that kind of thing, because it's so much shuttling around. I mean, I know of adjuncts who teach at 3 or 4 schools per semester, and it's a constant hustle, and this hurts students tremendously because most of their faculty's attention is splintered. It affects the parents too. The parents are paying the tuition bills. They have a right to know the conditions you're working.
Exactly. We have a bunch of questions that come and comments that come in from the chat box. Let me just quickly mention a few of these. Roxanne Riskin comments first that this echoes substitute teachers in the lower ed K through 12 who exist in the same ecosystem of no benefits. Sean Fraser says it's higher than that where he works. I think he's in Canada, if I'm right. He says many students never take a course from a faculty member in their programs. We have a couple of quick questions too. Tom had a detailed question about the 75% of classes being taught by non-tenured faculty. He says, does that inflate the numbers? Are they the same if you substitute tenure for full time?
It depends on the situation. And increasingly, I would say it depends, because full-time non-tenure track faculty member are fairly new, right? So yeah, sure, we'll take out a couple of visiting assistant professors here or there. And, you know, where I worked, I was full-time non-tenure track instructor. So I was not per se an adjunct, but I was a contingent faculty member based on my contract year after year. So it might inflate it a little bit, but I would still say that it's still more than half. And even full-time, and I mean, we want to really think about the student learning experience. We know from the research that student success is about the relationships that they build with people on campus. I only taught 2 classes, freshman writing. I never saw any of my students again. On campus, right? Unless I happen to run into them. They never were able to take another class with me. There was never the ability to build any sort of mentorship relationship with them. That, you know, and a lot of them, particularly in freshman writing or a freshman writing series, it's an extraordinarily vulnerable and it sets the tone for university, right? Particularly at an institution where students are already coming in with some of the lowest SAT or ACT scores. Morehead State, where I was in one of the poorest zip codes, or served some of the poorest zip codes in the country in Appalachia. Any of these courses that they're introduced to, and faculty that are introduced to into that first year, are essential for their success. And this course, freshman writing, is essential for their success. And I build a relationship with them, and then I never see them again. Right? Or I'm teaching with 5 courses, 5 times 25. So I'm teaching 125 students. How do I even have the time to give over to being able to build those kinds of relationships with them, and to what end? So it really, like, and the same thing with visiting assistant professors. They're there and then they're gone. Same thing with adjuncts who are in and out of the door. Same thing with graduate students who are teaching these classes. And a lot of times, again, adjuncts are teaching these fundamental, foundational, introductory courses to vulnerable freshmen and sophomore. Where, again, it runs right up against the research that's being done that says these students, particularly the most vulnerable ones, need to build relationships in those first years, in those first semesters, in order for them to be successful. The most successful one have those connections. It is almost impossible to build a meaningful connection with someone who does not have tenure. at an
Right. So
institution,
you,
unfortunately.
so you can't see and isn't there for more than a slice of time.
Yep.
That's a great answer. And this is, we have a video question coming up in just a second.
Okay.
So let's see if we can fit 4 people up here. It's going to be.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I know. Our time is. Hi, Sean. Can you hear us?
Hi, Sean.
I can hear you. Good afternoon.
God, that's a huge mic. Wow.
That is
Is
a
it
Death
working?
Star mic. I love it.
It is.
Yeah.
It's working just fine.
That's very old
Okay,
school. I like it.
Yeah, I have a question. I'd like to get your thoughts on how online education is affecting this problem, because I know at our institution, it's pretty easy if we can't find an instructor to get one from anywhere across the world, and we have them from coast to coast in Canada and even some across the ocean. And so I just wonder about the effect on.
Oh, great question.
Lee, have you ever taught online? Because I haven't.
No, I haven't. But it does exacerbate it.
It absolutely does. I mean, I just know not from personal experience, but from basically activist experience or networking, that it absolutely compounds the problem of using adjuncts. This is a phrase that someone I used to work with used, using adjuncts as coverage as opposed to as colleagues.
Yeah.
And that seems to be that's a great phrase, how she said that. She asked it to our chair, are we colleagues or are we coverage? And with Sean, with the online education, that's a lot more in the coverage camp. That is to say, just we'll pay this person $2,000 or $3,000, which is, or I don't know what the equivalent would be in Canada, but it's not very much, to do this course, to just sort of deliver this content and then move on. And I'm always going to come back to how this sort of disrespects and harms the students. Because as Lee said eloquently a few minutes ago, when there is that inability to build a lasting relationship or a mentorship with a faculty member, whether it's in the classroom or online, that's doing a great disservice to the students. Sean, have you taught online courses a lot? Or
I do. Our institution is entirely, well, essentially entirely online. So that's what I teach.
Okay.
And in terms of the role of a sessional, as we hire them on contract, we create the courses and say, here's the course, and then they have to sort of deliver it online. So it's different work.
Well, and we have to think about, again, what are we looking for? And it's colleagues or coverage, but is it teaching or is it just delivery? Right. And this is where we're starting to think about the disservice we're doing for our students as well, where if, and the textbook companies are getting into this. And so are, well, I don't have to pay you as an adjunct even anymore. I mean, you're starting to hear it that you're just a glorified TA. We've given you the content, the course runs itself. And really any of the expertise, I used to call myself, I was just an 18 graduate credit hour bag of meat. To meet the accreditation requirements. And you could see the same thing going on in online learning. Do you have 18 graduate credit hours? Great. Like, just run this course, right? And run it. Again, think of the language, the English teacher and the literature person in me. Think of the language we're using to describe what people are doing in these online courses. We're not teaching them. We're delivering them. We're managing them. We're executing them, whatever sort of words we want to say. And all of that going through continues to devalue all of our roles as teachers, right? The more we talk about online learning as just some sort of content delivery system, we are doing all of ourselves a disservice, including our tenure and tenure track colleagues, right? It completely undermines the real intellectual work and hard work that goes into any sort of teaching, online or otherwise. One of the other issues around online learning is not just, you can do more of them because you don't have the commuting time. And so again, less time devoted to it, increased automation of it because they don't have enough time. So rather than getting substantive feedback, you're doing automated quizzes and short answers. More and more talking about using AI to do these kinds of things.
That's a recent thing.
Chatbots, like we're going to have chatbots instead to engage student learners. Why is all this able to happen? Because you have turned it into a machine through adjunctification. There's also the question of intellectual property. Many adjuncts have spent many hours developing courses online or otherwise to just simply have them appropriated by the institution. Right? Oh, you made this course? Great. Someone else can teach it now.
It's
with zero added compensation. You know, like, and so it exacerbates not only the adjunct issue, but it exacerbates a lot of other underlying issues in higher education that we have just been able to ignore or unwilling to deal with because of adjuncts, because we can just sort of shunt that off on adjuncts. But again, as I said, anytime that an adjunct's intellectual property is violated, anytime an adjunct's role as a teacher is undermined and described as something other than being a teacher, you are undermining the entire institution and the entire structure of the institution. And maybe we need to do that. But
and again, hurting the students. Right? They're not benefiting.
No.
Yeah, even I like the idea. I mean, hearing Lee talk about the content delivery and whether it's online or in person, and a fellow activist Lee and I know was sort of dismissed or basically not renewed or non-renewed is the phrase they like to use.
Yeah, you can get fired.
A few years ago from a school in Pennsylvania, and as she was leaving, they asked her to share all of her course materials for the next person so they could build this kind of database or portfolio. And I think someone's going to be online and someone's going to be in person. And they wanted all the people they were non-renewing to do it, and none of them did, because it's the same thing. I worked hard to create these lectures.
Right.
This is my intellectual property, and this isn't just something you churn through a machine and it comes out. There's a lot of thought that goes into it, but it's just this sort of repeated idea where at all levels of the university nowadays, it seems there's just increasing precarity and increasing contingency. I know someone who was an advisor, and she would always remind me the same things was starting to happen to the advisors. And they would be sort of overworked, underpaid, and having to cobble together multiple, part-time positions and that sort of thing.
Well,
where's the money go? That's always my question. Yeah.
Well, that's a question. If we could, by the way, friends, if you're on Twitter, I just shared this extraordinary graphic that Joe shared with me before about how the academic staffing across the United States has changed. And Sean, you may experience something similar in Canada, but it's really extraordinary, where it shows where the major growth is in everywhere except tenured faculty. So the quick question is, where does the money go? Why have we done this? Cui bono? Why did we decide to shift from tenure track to adjunct? What's the quick sketch of the rationale for this? We didn't experience an economic catastrophe. There wasn't any kind of federal mandate. Why did higher education do this?
Largely, it's money saving. I mean, if just from my own experience, it was cheaper to hire me. Say when I worked at Georgetown, I made around $5,000 per course. That was cheaper to sort of do, say, 2 courses per semester, kind of one semester at a time, than invest in me as a full-time member of the department. I don't know how much more I would get, but I would get more than $5,000 per course. And that would also bring so much more along with it of different kinds of other funding and travel and per diems and that sort of thing. And the chart that Brian shared is something that my colleague at Precaricor used her graphic design skills on. There was the data is from AAUP, a study they did charting hiring changes in sort of hiring trends in higher ed from the 70s up until about 2011 is when the data stops. And there's an enormous jump in the part-time positions, in non-teaching sort of administrative positions. The smallest jump, which is why she put a unicorn over it, is 23% jump from the 70s to the early aughts in full-time tenure track positions.
And that's so we multiplied the student population by about 3.
Yeah,
right.
And that's
giving them more part-timers. Yeah.
Students have gone up, tuition has gone up.
Yeah.
Teaching has not gone up.
So we've saved money. This is listen. I have more questions, but there are questions that have come in from different participants. Let's flash these on the screen, Tara. We've got one, I think, from Wendy. Is that right? Let's see. If not out of scope for this conversation, I would like to hear how adjunct faculty tend to, or not, pursue professional development. I work in the faculty support department and struggle to reach your adjuncts. Oh, great question, Wendy. Thank you.
I think Lee and I could both talk your ear off on that one.
Yeah, pay them.
Pay them, right? Yeah.
Pay them. I mean, don't insult them by expecting them to do professional development that they are not compensated for, right? Mm-hmm. When the universities or institutions justify lower pay by saying you're paid for 3 graduate credit hours and that's it, and the only work that you're doing are 3 hours inside the classroom. So really, your hourly rate isn't that low. Oh, but by the way, we also expect you to do all these other things, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's insulting. And so you got to pay. I mean, that's the, are they still going to struggle to get people in there? I do faculty development. I struggle to get full-time tenured faculty to come to faculty development. And they are being paid to do it.
Right.
So pay them. Pay them.
Absolutely.
and reward them. Like, is there a pay scale? Why would they do professional development if there's not going to be any increase in their pay?
Right.
What's the point? Right? So they can feel good. I mean, think about it from their perspective. It's a cost-benefit analysis at a certain point where it's like, I'm not getting paid and I'm not going to get any benefit to this because y'all have been feeding me like, well, if I do this, maybe I'll get a tenure track job. No, I won't.
Yeah.
No, I won't. So I'm going to go spend time with my kids. I'm going to go work another job. I'm going to take on another class. Faculty development is the least of my concern.
Yeah, that's one of the carrots.
You're just like, oh, she brought it on that one.
I'm just using this up. That's one of the carrots on sticks that is dangled in front of adjuncts, especially if they've been there for a while. I mean, you'd always hear, oh, do such and such professional development, do this advising, even if it is paid, because it's always the valuable CV experience or another line. Like sometimes I'll joke tweet about it and people just run with it. We expect a full-time position to open soon. You'd be perfect for it. So do this advising, do this development. I can't underscore enough what Lee said. Pay them for doing the work to make them feel more valued, literally more valued in the university, to sort of pay for their expertise. It's one thing since leaving academia 4 years ago, the biggest thing I've seen is how my expertise is paid for.
Wow.
And
what a shock.
Yeah, it is. It's a very welcome thing when I, quote someone, for an editing project, and if my prices have gone up or something and they value the work and they pay for it, there isn't this, well, can you do X, Y, and Z for when I hire you the next time? It's do X, Y, and Z, and here's an extra $500 or here's an extra X. But yeah, Wendy, it's a good question. Pay them for the work.
We had an observation in the chat box from Tracy. Please forgive me if I mispronounce your last name. Tracy Roschetti says, I was in a union shop in a community college. I was paid $100 an hour to attend faculty meetings or orientation. Kept meetings short.
Mm-hmm.
We have and thank you, Tracy. We have another question, another text question. Let's see, Tara, if you can flash that on the screen. This is from Doyle. But that is true of all industries for all individuals not classified as part-time works in the marketplace. Might not be right, but is reality.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing the casualization of all kinds of work now. You're right. It's not just higher education, but that doesn't mean, like you said, it's not right. And we need to start being able to build bridges in solidarity against these sorts of things. I mean, one of the biggest reasons that people are saying we can't hire full-time people is the cost of healthcare, right? When we want to talk about costs. And I've seen some of the budgetary projections, and a lot of the times it isn't salaries necessarily, it's benefits that are absolutely murdering budgets. And for companies, but then they also find different ways. So the Affordable Care Act actually really messed up a lot of people in terms of the number of hours that they were now allowed to work. So they had their hours cut. I mean,
right.
there's it doesn't make it right. I mean, even Joe going and doing freelance, right? I mean, that is still a precarious situation. Whereas 20 years ago when I graduated my original training was in professional and technical writing, right? They were hiring technical writers full time during the tech boom. I could have gone out. I still have not made 20 years later as much money as I could have doing technical writing for a tech firm in 1997 or 1999. I still have not made made as much money as I could have made almost 20 years ago doing technical writing. But those jobs also don't exist anymore. They don't hire full-time people. They hire freelancers, and they don't pay for the benefits, right? So as you well know too, Brian. I mean, it's a catch-22 situation in that kind of way. And so then it becomes a question of you're right, it's not unique to higher education. There are certain aspects of it that are totally unique to our disciplines and our fields and our profession. But we see this devaluing of professional work and professional expertise across, all sectors, across all sectors of employment.
Two really quick observations about that, and this is fantastic. And you can see answers coming up from the chat box and also on Twitter. And Lee, thank you for sharing the game. Let's mention that before we go. There's just two very, very quick things. One is that in academia, unlike other sectors, we tend to nominally privilege long-term employment because of the academic environment, either relationships with students, as you mentioned, or long-term research projects. And most industries don't have that. The second thing is there's a lot of debate about this in the overall American labor force. Do we call this the gig economy or the 401 economy? How big is the gig economy? It's about 30% of the Australia. They call this the American economy. Just so you know. Before I cut loose, we have more questions. A text question from Tracy Rossetti. Please, Tracy. I think we can all agree it's shitty. Are we backed into this corner of unionization to solve the problem? Great question. Is the union way the way forward?
It's a way forward.
Yeah.
But it's a way forward. It's a way to gain wins on an individual institutional level for the group of adjuncts that are there. But unions, depending on how the contract is negotiated, depending on what kind of union circumstances, you'll get a pay raise. Maybe you'll get longer term contracts, but there's no union has yet been able to shake a tenure track tree, right? There's no tenure track tree to shake. There's money trees you can shake. There's contract trees you can shake, but there's no tenure track faculty tree to shake. And so this becomes a question of unions are a answer. I think it's an important piece of it. But I also think, we see the religious institutions opposing graduate student unions or adjunct unions because they get a religious exemption for that. We see private institutions doing that. There's a lot of debate about, should public sector workers even be unionized since it's direct taxpayer money? We have to change hearts and minds, and that's not easy. We need to change hearts and minds around these issues. I've always worked at public institutions, not private. And so for us, it's changing the hearts and minds of the legislature, right? Where are our priorities? I still think that there should be leverage on the accrediting bodies, right? These accrediting bodies need to be holding institutions accountable for the learning environment. I've always been at SAC schools, and those of you who are at SAC schools, you know what I'm talking about. They pulled us over the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. It's our accrediting body for schools in the South. I think that's what it stands for. It's always been SAC. And most other schools don't realize even who their accrediting bodies are. We, every 10 years, know intensely who they are. And yet, they seem to care so much about these things, and yet don't care about the percentage of courses being taught by non-tenure track faculty members, right? And I know what kind of stick SACS holds because I've seen institutions jump so high for them. And yet, where is the will to talk about these things? Where is the will to pressure these accrediting bodies to pay attention? Because if they start paying attention, the institutions will start paying attention. If the legislature starts asking questions about funding around these, institutions will start paying attention. Unions will get some attention, And again, for individual institutions and for individual people within those institutions, get what you can.
Yeah.
But it's hearts and minds, and it's cultural shift that needs to take place, and that's got to be a multi-pronged approach. And so I think lobbying legislature and doing whatever we can to make these accrediting bodies aware and start holding institutions accountable for what's going on.
Right.
And
I have no strong
students.
opinions about these.
No, I didn't notice them.
None. Not.
It's terrific.
Informing their parents. I mean, I keep coming back to that because record tuition, and then what do they get? Where does the money go? And there's always this narrative comes from the right of these, high-paid liberal professors who are brainwashing my child, and they're making all this money. That's no. But it tremendously, again, affects the students. I mean, I was fortunate when I was teaching at George Washington University, we did successfully unionize the part-time faculty. The university fought it tooth and nail, tried to challenge signatures, did everything they could. It was finally successful in the early 2000s. And it did, a few times it helped me because I actually had a contract. Like something on paper that said, here's what I can and cannot be forced to do. A lot of adjuncts don't have that. It's sort of at the mercy of the chair and there aren't a lot of protections. So I would agree with Lee that yes, it's a way out. It's not going to be a universal thing. There's not going to be the tenure track tree or the money tree, what have you. A few times it helped me when the school wanted to force an extra class on me for no extra money. All I had to do was just point to the line in my contract that said, basically cannot be forced to teach more than 3 courses per year without pay. And that shut it down. But I know that's the exception. The rule tends to be, well, if I want to be a good sport or if I want to get that extra $2,500 or $3,000 or whatever it is. Because the average pay for an adjunct per course is $2,800, which is nothing. I mean, when you stretch that out over, say, 4 months and maybe a paycheck every month or something before taxes, that's not even a lot. Then after taxes, so. No, and I would agree with Lee also to tie it with the accreditation bodies and how this is affecting student learning and faculty retention and just general faculty working conditions and how it affects the learning that happens at colleges and universities.
Well, and this is also, I mean, again, it's part of an ecosystem where now we have it that we have less and less tenure and tenure track faculty to do the administrative work and to do the committee work and to do the advising work. And this is how you end up with outsourcing advising, because now there's not enough faculty to advise all of these undergraduate students, and so it's not being done effectively, and so therefore we have to outsource this stuff and do it, and then there's another cost. The number of committees that faculty have to do, plus the research that they have to do. I mean, this puts a lot of stress and strain on the tenure and tenure track faculty. Right. And again, look at the tenure requirements. The tenure requirements just keep going up and up and up. Junior faculty are under, I don't know if I'd ever want a tenure track job at this point. I don't think I would. Because it's just.
I'm glad every day that I left.
Well, before we all leave, I'm conscious of time. I hate to pause this, but we had another question coming in from Lindsay Hansen, I think. And I want to make sure we get this in. Lindsay asks, I faced much resistance from admin who believes PD, professional development, is just part of the job. How would you suggest approaching the discussion with admin to encourage paid PD? Good one, Lindsay.
One thing I would say is to try to break down not only how much labor each step of that entails, but show how it's benefiting students individually and the department or the university as a whole. To show that it isn't just something they kind of do as part of the job, but it's a time-consuming thing. And a breakdown. Return on investment. Not just, I want a little bit more money in my pocket because I want to buy a new iPhone, but here's how paying me to do this work, it makes you literally more invested in it, first of all. And return on investment. Look how it's benefiting the students, my fellow faculty, and so on.
Yeah. And I think as well, you know, like I said, break it down for them. Break it down just how little the adjunct is being paid.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like this isn't like, oh, they're rolling around and making six figures and, oh, it's just an hour. And it's like, yeah, but, you know, okay, so you're going to say the 3 graduate credit hours and maybe you pay for office hours and maybe you don't. And you definitely don't pay for course prep and you definitely don't pay for all that grading. And you're not paying for, you know, and so one more thing, like break down how much an adjunct is actually making on an hourly basis and say like, come on guys, like this is.
And we did some of that. When the Affordable Care Act launched, a lot of schools had to do just that. We have another, well, not a question, but a proposal, a future vision that came in from Michael Johnson. And let me see if I can just quickly summarize it. He was wondering about a way forward for adjunct faculty. He said, could it be possible to have a kind of open university with low course fees and instruction from adjunct faculty? Let's see. The professors will still get paid by course, but the key thing is that the physical plant would either be non-existent, that is wholly online, or would use public facilities such as libraries or economic development buildings. Would it be possible to set up such a low-cost adjunct university or adjunct college? What do you think about that?
Isn't that what community colleges were supposed to be? I mean, you know, I sound really cynical saying that, but in a certain way, that's what community colleges were supposed to be, right? There are attempts to be doing stuff like this. The most egregious one is that private institution where they pay a ton of money for no school. Oh, what was that called? There's the private institution. It was like, you know, pay $40,000 a year or something like that, but we're only going to take the top 10 smartest people.
Minerva.
Yes, Minerva. That's it. So you've got the Minerva suggestion, but then you also have something like the Brooklyn Institute, if I'm getting that right, that do exactly that, where, you know, you can take courses, humanities courses in philosophy, and they're using the Brooklyn Institute infrastructure, offering these courses. And so the money pretty much just goes directly into the adjunct's pocket. And it's a kind of public outreach. And we're seeing this in grassroots efforts. There's a grassroots effort to, I saw it shared about getting African-American low-income women to pass the bar exam, right? Like you don't have to go to law school. You just need to pass the bar. So how can we be doing things like this? How can we be using public libraries? You know, I want to keep hope in the community college system because that was what it was built for. Something like the Cal State system, that's what it was built for. I taught in the Cal State system. There's such potential there.
Which one? Which CSU?
San Bernardino.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are going to be lots of answers. I think that there are going to be lots of people and I threw up the idea at one point, like, let's not accredit institutions, let's accredit instructors.
Yeah.
Right. So if I'm accredited, you know, why can't I teach a freshman writing course? I've taught it at 5 different accredited institutions. Clearly I can teach it. Why can't I as an individual be accredited to offer this course? Right.
So maybe we just totally shift it and maybe use ORCID as the basis and have institutions and supplemental. Friends, I hate to do this, but here on East Coast, frozen, grumpy time, it's 3 o'clock. And that means we have barreled through a full hour. And I have to say, first of all, Joe, my thanks to your son, who is the epitome of politeness by keeping calm. Cool. I know how precious that is for the parent. And let me thank both of you, Lee and Joe, for such passionate, informed, intense, and such needed thoughts and reflections on this issue. You asked Lee about what we can do to lobby you or increase awareness. I think you're both doing that, and I hope this session did a little bit of that. I would love to come back to both of you this fall, perhaps for the new book from Kansas, or to keep track of how the adjunct development goes. But thank you so much.
Also, check out New Faculty Majority. Donate to PreCariCorps. Join New Faculty Majority. I just want to give a shout out to one win that we've achieved. We talked about this at MLA, some actual wins, because typically we can get a little depressed about it. One of the biggest things that New Faculty Majority, in conjunction with multiple adjunct unions across the country, was able to lobby and get a clarification on unemployment insurance. Because for a long time, adjuncts were unable to get unemployment insurance over the summer. And so they lobbied the labor board to give a clarification and to issue a memo. And so they got that memo so that now adjuncts have a much easier time, not an easy time, but a much easier time getting unemployment insurance over the summer. And if anyone ever needs help getting unemployment insurance, to get in touch with the New Faculty Majority, they have resources for that, because you worked, you paid into it. There's no reason why you cannot have access to that, because you do not have a reasonable expectation of being rehired in the fall.
Friends, the best ways to keep track of you. In the chat box, Joe just shared the PreCariCorps site. And Lee, is the best way, well, first of all, you need to go to adjunctrun.readywriting.org to get to the game about being an adjunct. And that's Ready Writing is your site where we can find it.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
and also I'll put the New Faculty Majority one in there too. I should have put that one from the beginning, but.
Thank you. And we need to wrap up and point to next week. But thank you both again. And thank you to everybody for so many good comments, questions, stories, observations. This has been a real treasure. Thank you. Thank you all. But don't go away. We have to show you what's going on next week. So next week we have, let's see, Tara is behind the scenes pulling all these different pulleys and buttons and whistles. We have a really, really interesting project and a fascinating guest. We have Claire Nelson, who just finished publishing a report called Providentia's Future, which is the only all-female authored futures document in the past couple of years. It's a really, really important, very accessible, very fascinating document. But when we're looking at female representation in the workforce, including academia, I was especially excited to see an all-women's futures project. So please join us a week from Thursday on the 29th so we can dive into Providentia's promise. Now, also going on, we are getting ready to pick our next title for the book club. I've got a couple in mind, but if you want to lobby me hard for one, please let me know so we can pick that next title. If you have a chance to finish soonish, finish it. It's up on the website, lots of good stuff there. Now, also, speaking of books and book clubs, head to the bookstore. If you're looking for presents for yourself or your friends, just go to brianalexander.org/bookstore, the only future education bookstore on earth. Now, if you'd like to keep talking about all this stuff, if you'd like to keep the conversation going, use the hashtag FTTE. And on the screen, you can see a bunch of Twitter accounts from me, for Shindig, and please stay in touch. Thank you so much for a really, really important session today. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.